glad to be here with you all. So we are going to talk about consent today. That's kind of the big picture of this presentation, but within that topic, we're going to talk about a few other components and how consent relates to our lives as either caregivers or professionals in the field working with young people, but also how consent applies to us in our everyday life. So I am going to share. And you are legally required to say that you're sharing your screen when you are doing a Zoom presentation. That's what I've been told. Let's see. Can everybody see that okay?
Yeah.
Awesome. So I just want to say before I even get into this presentation, I like to think of these as conversations, like facilitated conversations, almost more than just a presentation. I know not everybody might be comfortable talking off mute, but we've got a chat. And if I throw out a question to you all, or if say we wanted to get wild on this Friday and do a icebreaker, I would hope that you would participate because it makes it a lot more fun for everyone involved. We're here to learn, but it's also Friday afternoon, and I'd like to ease us into a topic that feels maybe new, but also familiar at the same time. So, hi everyone, I'm Layla. My pronouns are she, her, hers. Um, I think a great icebreaker would be what are some, I'm going to do a fun one instead of a professional one. What is your feeling today, and how could you describe it as this kind of potato that you are? Like, I like to call this state of potato. So I have had a very busy week, and I'm honestly feeling a little bit like a twice baked potato. I've been through the oven a couple of times. Had some deadlines to meet. I know this is kind of goofy, but I just wanted to loosen us up a little bit. Anybody feel like participating and saying hi and letting me know what kind of potato they feel like today? It could also be that you're like a couch potato or yeah, a sweet potato. It's whatever you want to do. So take it away, somebody feeling brave.
I will actually go ahead and share. I feel like right now I am currently in that twice baked potato stage with you, but I can feel myself kind of transitioning to the mashed potato for the weekend. Um, I feel like that resonates a similar vibe to like the couch potato. I'm just gonna
I feel that.
mash it out and just relax.
Let us cook, let us bake, as it were.
Hmm.
Katie, I see you in the chat. I love that you said ube. I am half Filipino, so ube is culturally very important to my people. And it's delicious and it's purple. What more could we ask for? That is so on brand for you. I love that. If you don't feel like sharing what kind of potato you feel like, that is okay. But I hope you know that we are going to have some fun. So here we go. Let's get into it. Um, has everybody heard the term consent before? In the chat, if you feel comfortable, what do you think of when you hear the word consent? Anybody have any thoughts? I think a lot of times when I ask people, whether it's a group of professionals or a room full of teenagers in a health class, I hear a lot of times, oh, wait, somebody's got it going on in the chat. Um, we've got permission. Yeah, both of you said permission. That's absolutely what I think of too. Permission or an agreement, right? Or an understanding where something is communicated, an agreement or maybe a denial, right? Refuting a negative response, a no. So when we talk about consent, I just want to make sure we understand we are not talking about consent in any sort of legal terminology or the definition of legal consent or the age of consent. That's not what we're talking about today. We are talking about consent as a broad term for our personal boundaries in everyday life. It doesn't matter who we are, doesn't matter what our age, our gender representation, any of those things. Everybody's boundaries are going to be different, right? So we want to be sure we're talking about consent in a way that is personalized. We cannot just give blanket consent for things. Even when you sign a consent form, say like for a young person going on like a field trip, that's just my sort of basic example. It's for a very specific activity, right? It's not a blank consent form to go anywhere with anyone. It is they are going to the Natural History Museum in Lawrence, Kansas at 2:30 p.m. and the bus leaves at 2, right? It is very clear. Uh, all of the information is there. It's got that transparency. So when we talk about consent, there's a million of these out there, but I like fries. So consent is freely given, right? Somebody can give their consent, and at any point they can also take it back. It's reversible. Within those first two components of fries, I always use this example, but a very savvy teenager once said to me, well, if you can't say no comfortably, can you really say yes? I think that's super smart. I think that really hones in on the freely given and reversible part. Um, Consent is also informed. It's like what I talked about with the consent form for the field trip. We know what is about to happen. And again, this is not specific to sex or relationships. This is for anything. We need and have to get consent for all different kinds of things and activities all the time, every single day. We are having consent conversations literally every single day. So consent is also enthusiastic. Enthusiastic means we want to do whatever it is that's about to happen. Um, I always like to throw this question out. And again, we might not feel comfortable talking on the chat or talking off mute, but at least like ponder, could somebody say yes and actually not mean it? What do we think? And why might they say yes and not mean it? Any thoughts? I mean, I talk to young people a lot, and so I got somebody in the chat. Yeah, they might feel pressured. I think pressure, and I was going to use the term peer pressure, Katie. I'm sure we've all heard that. I'm sure at some point we've experienced it. Heck, adults experience it too. Yeah, oh, I love that answer, Michelle. That's great. They might feel pressure. They might be naive, right? Yeah, or societal expectations. The chat is blowing up. You guys have great answers. Thank you. I agree. I think all of those are really they are the variables that might affect how comfortable somebody is saying what it is they want. When we talk about enthusiastic, I also want to recognize that there can be power dynamics within consent conversations. Oh, I'm checking the chat again. Ooh, Michelle, that's a great answer. And that's kind of what we're talking about today, right? If they don't have the cognitive ability to understand something, then there cannot be consent. I'm going to use this as an example, even though it's not like a perfect example. It's similar in the way when we talk about consent for sex, that if somebody is incapacitated by drugs or alcohol, they cannot legally or personally give actual consent. We know that somebody has to actually understand what is happening to give that informed consent. And then similar to informed, specific means it is specific to that activity. Again, to revert back to the field trip example, we want to know what's happening. And this is all trauma informed too, right? We've got transparency, we've got clarity, we've got plain language if somebody might have like those communication barriers, right? Or maybe they are in the IDD population, so we need to be sure that they're understanding what we're saying. We are going to talk about all the different ways that we can communicate, but I just want to be clear that when we talk about consent, it really is just personal boundaries. And when we think specifically about the ASD and IDD communities, whether that's children, teens, or adults, there is that tendency to not think about bodily autonomy when it comes to people with disabilities. Maybe there's caregiving that's needed, whether that's physical or organizational, like cognitive. But the reality is that regardless of anyone's ability, they they are they are afforded bodily autonomy because they're a human being. And so I think it's important to recognize that when we talk about specifically to the ASD and IDD populations, um, it is on us, whether that is as a parent or a professional or somebody interacting with a kiddo, that we get to be the model and the example for that. And that's absolutely part of the topic today. So, any thoughts, questions, or comments? I'm a big fan of thoughts, questions, or comments. So if you have anything at any point, throw it into the chat. And thank you for those great answers. So I want to be clear. Um, we we kind of talk about consent in a way that it's like there's an indication that we have to give verbal consent. Well, what if somebody can't speak? What if somebody is nonverbal? Okay. I want us to think about body language. So in a prior job, when I talked to people about consent all the time, we always wanted it to be verbal plus the body language backing it up, right? That they are enthusiastically engaging in whatever it is that's about to happen. So if somebody can't verbally affirm or deny that they want to do something, how do we actually know? Well, maybe it could be through writing. Maybe it could be through assistive tech, right? But we want to understand that body language is not always readable. If you know this person really well and you understand what their body language means, it might be really clear to you. But maybe for just like the average person that interacts with somebody, they don't know because they don't have this established relationship. What does their body language mean? So that's why it's important to have those other components to get that verbal or written or maybe through assistive tech other form of consent. And again, we want to make sure that the person understands what they're consenting to. And so some people might say, well, what if they don't understand? How do we explain that to them? You just explain it in a way that you would explain anything else. Because here's the thing about consent. What it does is I love the way this slide says it. It creates a foundation of healthy relationships, right? You're building trust. You're having clarity. There's transparency. You're using plain language that everybody can understand. When we talk about empowering individuals, I hear that phrase a lot when it comes to disability, empowering people. But I think that we have to kind of look at ourselves in the mirror. I did disability advocacy for the TBI population for, gosh, I think it was almost 8 years. And one of the things that kept coming up was, my clients said a lot of times, I can tell when I'm being patronized and when I'm not given a choice. And so, regardless, again, of somebody's cognitive ability or where they might land on the ASD spectrum, the reality is everybody knows what they like. Right. And even if they might not be able to verbalize it, they have other ways of letting us know that something is enjoyable or something is comfortable to them. When we talk about the role of consent interactions, I think it's really important that we show them what it looks like to give and get consent. So let's see what that looks like. Oh, we're on a ride together, everybody. So some strategies. I think along trauma informed principles, we are creating a safe learning environment. It is not only essential to teaching consent, but that's what fosters trust and intimacy, right? Is allowing people to express themselves. Again, if somebody says, no, I don't want to do that, that doesn't make me comfortable, maybe they can't be left alone in a classroom, right? But the reality is that maybe there's a workaround. Or maybe if they went and did that activity knowing that they're uncomfortable, that could escalate, right? It could turn into maybe some crisis management that was absolutely unnecessary if we had allowed that person to have some choice, some voice, that again, bodily autonomy. When I was doing this like slide deck or this Prezi, I talk a lot about like green flag behaviors or like stoplight ways of thinking about things. Well, green to me means everybody's boundaries are being respected. Um, Maybe there needs to be confidentiality around something. This is what contributes to being supportive and again, being trauma informed. So that's what it looks like to create a safe environment. I would also say, excuse me, environmentally, we want to think about what creates a safe environment. Um, we should know that if you're meeting one-on-one with somebody, that other people can see in, right? And that the door can be open. Unless it's a distraction, there still needs to be a workaround. Um, when we talk about creating a safe environment, that could be individualized for the person that we're interacting with, but it could also be that environmental scan, making sure there's transparency for what's going on in that room for other people. Okay. Utilizing visual aids and role play. So if people have never been taught about bodily autonomy and real talk, that's a lot of people. I have spent a lot of time talking to kids and teenagers, and they get that concept more. Um, they get that concept because a lot of times people under 18 don't have a lot of autonomy, right? Somebody is usually, again, those power dynamics, somebody is usually in charge of them, where they're going. They don't have like the freedom to kind of just, do things on their own without somebody knowing what's going on. So when we talk about role playing, I think a really good way to practice consent is giving people choices. So maybe there are 4 activities that you could do. And instead of you, the professional or the adult or the caregiver in that situation, making the choice, maybe for your group, you give them the 4 options of activities, and then it's a democratic process. There's a vote, majority, or maybe there's compromise. Maybe those 4 activities are scheduled out over the course of a month so that every single activity is able to be engaged in. Um, you know, it's also an opportunity for that community building, right? If you have a group of people and you're trying to get everyone to understand consent, it's about understanding what other people want to and making those compromises. If somebody has deal breakers, though, then that can be a no for them. And that's okay. If somebody says, there is no way I am doing equine therapy and riding a horse, it's not going to happen. Um, that's okay. They might be in a different place a year from now, but maybe in this moment that feels like too much. That's too intense. That's a bigger activity than they were ready to tackle. And so I think respecting people's boundaries is important. Again, I know that that doesn't always work if you have group activities or if you are the person leading the charge on something that has to be done, right? But I think it's when we force people or push people into places where they are uncomfortable that they are then no longer able to learn. Our brains do not function well in environments that feel unsafe to us. That is why we engage in trauma informed principles. So, utilizing visual aids, I know that this can look a lot of different ways. I'm a huge fan of books. There are so many books that you can read to kiddos and teens of all ages. And of course, there's ones that are age appropriate, ones that are appropriate for folks with disabilities of all kinds. You might have to do a little Google search or, look at some book lists. I can also share a reading list that I have for both people under 18 and adults, caregivers and professionals working with them or living with them. So I think it's important that we read books that model consent and bodily autonomy. For younger kids, one of my favorite ones, the drawings are just amazing. It's called Don't Hug Doug, He Doesn't Like It. Doug likes lots of other things like high fives and fist bumps, but he's not a fan of hugs except from his mom. And I think, especially when we look at ASD and IDD populations, y'all, this is such an important conversation, right? Um, not every child has a plethora of safe people in their lives. And so for us to really embody that, we have to think about what our practices look like. So I want to talk specifically about, I just realized what a kind of goofy the graphic that was. Um, Implementing clear and simple language. I might use some big fancy words in a presentation like this, but when I talk, I am trying to use plain language all the time. It is so important. When we talk in plain language, not only does it give everyone an opportunity to feel like they're part of the conversation, regardless of age, education level, cognitive ability, it also just, I'm not an overly, oh, I got somebody in the chat. Yes, Michelle, I want to read your comment out. Teaching them early on something as simple as choice between hugs, etc., has been a big deal for me, regardless of ability. I am so glad you brought that up. I actually um use hugs as an example, but I think it's maybe become a little passe or a little like, oh, we all know that. But I'm so glad you brought it up, Michelle, because I think about when I interact with older folks, like the aging and elderly populations. This is a lot of new information for them. And I think grandmas and grandpas have the best intentions, but allowing a child to make a decision about giving or getting hugs is such a great baseline example of bodily autonomy. Um, for anyone that's a parent or a caregiver or just a trusted adult in a kid's life, I think, I'm a big hugger. I'm a cuddler. I love giving kids high fives, but I always check in and I never assume. And somebody said, gosh, do you do that with every single kid? Well, it literally takes 1.5 seconds to say, can I give you a hug or a high five? I don't know if you've seen videos on social media of teachers that greet their students at the beginning of every day in the front of their classroom, and the kids get to choose how they interact. Maybe it is a high five, maybe it's an elbow or a fist bump or a hug or nothing at all. And that's okay too. I want to speak to the idea that everybody appreciates or enjoys physical affection. They don't. Especially for the ASD population, I want us to be cognizant of how sensory can be, or how sensory stuff can be overwhelming. Um, when I get somebody hugging me too tight, I have sensory overwhelm. I feel like I can't breathe. I love a good hug, but if you are bear hugging me to the point where I feel like constricted or restricted, that doesn't feel good. So, I think when we check in with ourselves, even as adults, we can think of so many examples throughout our life where unfortunately somebody didn't recognize our body language. And for kids to speak up, even for teens to speak up, when an adult is crossing a boundary or making them uncomfortable, think about the power dynamics that exist inherently between between minors and adults. What if you are a professional that's working with that child? Again, that power dynamic, we have to be able to say, oh, this person might not actually feel comfortable saying what they really think, or they might be banking on that I have an expectation of them. So again, we need to be thinking about plain language. We need to be thinking about transparency and really checking in a lot. How are we doing? Are we comfortable? Um, I have had a couple of long-term positions in my adult life where I had to talk to groups of people about some difficult subjects. And not really knowing all the time who my audience was, I checked in a lot and gave a lot of space for people to process how they were feeling or thinking. And if I thought that somebody was maybe having a hard time, not to make an assumption and override their bodily autonomy, I might say, like, hey, if anybody needs to take a bio break, that's a bathroom break, or just take a breather. Let's take 5 minutes. And sometimes that might help somebody who's feeling dysregulated take that moment to ground themselves. Or if it's somebody that needs assistance in that moment to help regulate themselves, that can be a great time to do that too. All right, I'm getting off topic. Let's go to the next slide. So what does it look like to model consent? And Michelle, again, I want to thank you for that comment. I think hugs or any kind of physical interaction are really good examples of how we model consent. say you're in a classroom or in a room with somebody, and another adult walks in and you've got some young people in front of you. Maybe you say, hey, how's it going, Joe? And Joe says, well, I'm having a hard day, or it's been kind of busy and stressful today. And so rather than making an assumption about whether physical touch is appropriate, or comforting somebody, from the goodness of our hearts, we might want to make somebody feel good in the moment. That doesn't mean we have to assume that they want physical touch. So I want to be clear when somebody is like, say, expressing frustration, or that they're down, or that they're sad, or that they are feeling like nervous about something. Touching them without permission might activate that even more, right? And so I think it's important to just check in verbally, if possible, and then see what they need. And if we can model that as adults with other adults in front of young people that we're working with, that we're caregiving, this is what it looks like. When we model it with them directly, again, it depends on the relationship. But say you are doing an activity that does require physical adjustment. Let's say it's in like a sensory room for kiddos with ASD, and you're helping somebody get into like I don't know the actual professional term, but it's like one of those slings that's sort of also like covered on the sides. It's like a swing or a sling. I'm not remembering the word, sorry. Um, but you might have to make some physical adjustments with that child. It might not just be as easy as climb in and make yourself comfortable. They might need some help. You let them know every single step of the way. I remember when I was talking to like a whole school district, and a lot of like the athletic coaches were like, well, I mean, you got to make physical adjustments, like mechanical adjustments, when you're teaching them how to do something. Well, you can still ask. I think about that like in pediatrician offices. Kids still have to get, you still have to get permission before you check like the private body parts for a kid in a doctor's office. It isn't just assumed. And also, kids can say, no, I don't want to do that. So there are so many examples where adults, whether that's professionally or personally, can model consent for kiddos. Holler at me in the chat if you got any thoughts, questions, or comments. I'm just talking away over here. We're about halfway through, and I just really want to impart to you all that we can think of examples again when our consent hasn't been honored, or our consent hasn't even been thought about. And I want us to think about, translate that to folks with disabilities. To say somebody has a physical disability, so much of their life might rely on caregivers taking care of their physical body, right? If consent conversations are not happening all the time in those situations, we have people who are getting care from people who are making them uncomfortable. I also want to talk a little bit about the roles of parents and adult caregivers for people with disabilities. A lot of times, in my experience as an advocate for folks with disabilities, it is the families and the caregivers that can be the barrier or the gatekeeper to people's autonomy. I just want to say that very gently, because it's not a condemnation per se. It's it's that we infantilize people with disabilities, and we certainly don't talk to them about things like sex or sexuality or masturbation or even relationships, because we might determine based on our own experience or our own um, understanding of that person's ability that they may never have sex, or they may never be in a relationship. But that is actually not for us to determine all the time. Okay. I think there are plenty of times where people with specifically physical disabilities are determined to be incompetent or unable to engage in relationships. And I, again, want to repeat, people know when they're being patronized, people know when they're being discriminated against. And so the idea that people with disabilities of any age can't understand their bodies is really unfortunate, and not only limiting to their experience, but I think it's also an example of if you have a disability, there is this assumption that you can just never have like a life that is based on your own wants and desires. That was my experience working in the disability community. I think we're moving in a much better direction, especially in the last 10 to 15 years of understanding autonomy for people of all abilities. But I think it is important that we recognize that families and caregivers can sometimes be the hurdle that we have to jump over. Um, I have worked with many adults with traumatic brain injuries who were essentially treated like the teenager that never got to grow up. And that is unfortunate because those were full-fledged adult human beings. And maybe they have to live with their parents or their caregivers. Um, but the reality is, oh, let's see what there's a comment. Yes, of course. Um, Oh, Michelle, you're prompting me with so many good thoughts. I really appreciate your comments in the chat. So, yes, of course, when we have a baby or a toddler, we don't necessarily think of them that way as like sexual beings. But the reality is that children as young as 2 and 3 can self-stimulate. That is developmentally not inappropriate. Oh, hang on, there's more in the chat. She's 14. Okay. Sorry, I misread that. Because she's your baby. Yes, well, if she's 14, then I hope you are talking with her about it. So I want to say that when we have teenagers, right? I think whether that teen has a disability or not, there is that attempt to like pull everything back and say, like, no, 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 they can't grow up in this way. And so I really appreciate your vulnerability in the chat, Michelle. I just want to say I think it is important to find what is the right way for you guys. Okay. Um, the right way doesn't exist in a blanket way. All right. I do think we should have talked to kids of all ages by the age of 8 about their bodies, the names of their private body parts. I would hope have been introduced long before then. But I say 8 is great to talk about sex. Okay. Now, when we get to teenage years, I don't think we should shy away from those uncomfortable conversations. Real talk, the more uncomfortable conversations you're willing to have, the more of a trusted adult you become. Okay? We cannot be afraid of making mistakes or being awkward in that moment because then the conversation doesn't keep going. Uh, Yes, I want to validate that too. In the chat, Michelle said, I tell her that no one should be touching her without permission. That's exactly right. And that is regardless of who that person is. Even if it is your mom and dad, even if it is your favorite person in the world, even if it is the best teacher you've ever had, everybody has to get permission similarly. Oh, the chat is blowing up. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much for the interaction. It makes it more fun to talk about what I think is not only an important topic, but is so needed for adults as much as it is for people under the age of 18. Grown-ups need this information because we were not taught this explicitly. Um, Not to harken back to the beginning, but when I think about the idea of consent being taught to me as a child of the 70s and 80s, did not happen. Sex ed was terrible in the 80s, and I know because I received it. And so I just think about now we're actually moving into a time where we might actually go back to a lack of sex ed or abstinence only education. I know that that's not uncommon across parts of Kansas to have abstinence only education, but I am in a little bit more of a tiny progressive area in Kansas that still struggles to have comprehensive sex ed. And sex ed is not just about biology and reproduction. Okay. That is also talking about identity, gender, sexuality. Um, Kids are so smart. Adults need to catch up. I just want to say that adults need to think about how kids are talking about things as well. All right, we're gonna keep moving forward. Um, yes. Yeah, I think that's so real. I just want to say again, our lived experiences, and now that we're adults, might truly inform why we have reticence or why we're um not confident to talk about sex and consent because maybe we weren't given that at all, right? That's what I mean about adults need this information as much as kids. And so when we are worried because we didn't get it, well, we also have the internet and a library card and amazing resources out there. Um, I just want to throw in for anyone that's taking notes or paying attention out there. Planned Parenthood has great videos. Um, there's a site on YouTube, or there's a page on YouTube called Amaze. I think it's all caps. Amaze has great videos about all sorts of topics, and they're really appropriate for kiddos of all ages and developmental abilities. And I think they're mostly animated, they're super fun. Definitely take a look. There are great resources out there. When I started consent-based prevention education back in like, oh my gosh, 2015, that was a decade ago. That's wild. Um, there were very few resources, y'all. I would dig and dig and dig. And, the internet is vast, but I could find very little. And so now it actually heartens me to see how many resources, how many books, how many YouTube pages there are that talk specifically about consent, boundaries, sex, identity, relationships, online content. That is a big conversation that I have all the time. So all right, I'm getting hung up. Let's keep going. Um, and I think the one of the last things we can talk about as far as like practicing and modeling and sharing what consent can look like, teaching people to advocate for themselves. That might be us modeling what it looks like to advocate for them in the first place. It might also be like, well, tell us what you do like. Um, to assert their boundaries, it fosters that confidence and independence. Okay. So last little bit, you guys. I know we've all heard of the term trauma informed. Frankly, I find it a little buzzy, like it's a buzzword or a buzz term right now, and it's lost a little bit of its meaning, or it's kind of been diluted. And so I just want to be clear, when we're talking about trauma, it can obviously impact an individual on many different levels, but especially the ability to communicate effectively. Um, if somebody has had their boundaries crossed in a really harmful way, if they've experienced, say, like sexual or physical or domestic violence, they may struggle to assert their boundaries, or um, their boundaries might feel extreme to somebody from the outside viewing in. But in fact, those are all protective mechanisms. People's boundaries are individual because their experiences are individual. Somebody might really enjoy an activity and have had a great time. And then, oh, I'll give a good example. So, somebody might really like roller coasters. Okay, it's almost summer. Um, and they may have gone on many roller coasters and really enjoyed it, but lately they're having a little bit of trouble with a fear of heights. And so even though in the past they've enjoyed roller coasters, that like feeling of destabilization from their fear of heights might make it hard for them to say like, I'm really enthusiastically wanting to do this again. But because they've done it in the past, there might be an assumption that they're comfortable with it. um, I know that this is not always the same as like a traumatic event, but what is a traumatic event again is individualized to other people, or to each person. So I just want us to be clear that when trauma has impacted somebody, they may have anxiety or confusion or withdraw, and it can affect their ability to communicate clearly. And so it really is for us to look at and understand, and if we have a strong relationship with that person, identify maybe this is a moment where they need support in a different way. All right, let's see. This is something that I think is important to talk about because whether you're a caregiver or you're a professional, we have some responsibility when a child or a teen discloses something to us that might warrant making a mandated report or making a report, whether that's to um, like an entity like DCF, the Department for Children and Families, or law enforcement. Um, some people, it's required by their licensure or their job title that they are a mandated reporter. That's most staff in schools, hospitals, where else? Yeah, the clinicians. There's lots of people who are mandated reporters. I am a fan of saying it's important to know a mandated reporter if you're not one, but if you're not a mandated reporter, you can still make good faith reports if necessary. Um, you don't have to give all your information. You can do it anonymously. There's both an online form and a hotline. Yes, people still make phone calls. Um, I think we have to also recognize that making a mandated reporter is not like this magic solution, right? It starts a formal process. It involves systems that can sometimes also maybe be harmful. I think it's important to recognize that if you are making a mandated report about something that you're concerned about or a disclosure that's been given to you have to have some transparency about that. That is trauma informed as well. If a child says, hey, um, I don't like doing this activity because it reminds me of the time when my caregiver um touched my bottom in a way that I didn't like when they were cleaning it. I didn't like it at all and it made me uncomfortable. So we come in and we might say, okay, well, I don't have to ask a lot of questions, but that does concern me. Um, if this is important and you feel like a boundary was crossed, I have to talk to somebody else about this. It's not that it becomes a choice for the child necessarily, but to be open and transparent builds that trust yet again. It's important to not make promises about the results or the consequences. I think a lot of people don't recognize that most people who harm a child, that child usually knows them and has a relationship with them. Um, I've said this a million times, but the stranger in the bushes myth, that's maybe more of a conversation for online, but in person, most people that harm children know the child and are in some sort of relationship with that child, whether that be a family member, um, a teacher, a mentor, clergy. It could look a lot of different ways, but it is rarely some random person in an alley, right? And so I think it's important to recognize when somebody is disclosing to you any kind of experience of violence, whether that be sexual, physical, domestic, even emotional, right? Not even. I don't like to put things on a spectrum and compare and contrast and say one's better or worse than the other. That's not the case. Emotional abuse might be harder for a child or a teen to articulate, but these are all valid concerns. And so I think the last sentence is really important too. That's why I put an exclamation point at the end. You don't have to know all the details. You don't even have to know more than something happened that didn't feel right. And if it has anything to do with things like private body parts or mouths or um, a child's hand has been put somewhere that they didn't like or they felt uncomfortable, these are all reasons to make a good faith report. Oh, I'm neglecting the chat. I see it. Here we go. Yes. And so I think, when we really look at responding to disclosures, again, it is if you are yourself or not mandated reporter by your licensure or by your job title, make sure you know somebody who is. And if you have further questions, you should feel free to call your local DCF office and ask those questions. Katie and I are in a collaboration together, and I'm gonna have somebody from the local DCF office talk to our group so that we can have a better understanding of the lived experiences of people who interact with DCF if a call is made about their child or if they have concerns about something that's going on. All right, I think we might be at the near the end. Yeah, and I think, you can actually pick up the what should it call the it's not a pamphlet, it's a oh my gosh, it's like a workbook. I'm sorry. It's Friday and I'm blanking on this word apparently. You can pick one of those up at the local DCF office that tells you the requirements with mandated reporting. Um, I do think it is important that we balance the sensitivity of making a report um, with being, again, that safe individual for that child, not making promises, not asking a lot of questions, letting them know what you do know that might happen for the next step, right? I've got to make this call, and then somebody else might be checking in with you and your family, either at the school or at home, about what happened. They might have questions for you. Um, it's so important to have that transparency because then whoever it is that you're talking to, whoever you're supporting, knows you're being open and honest to the best of your ability. You might not be able to make those promises that, oh, this person that harmed you is gonna, experience A, B, or C, but you can say, but I'll be here with you to support you in my role as A, B, or C. And I think it's important because kids and teens of all abilities need so many trusted adults in their life. I always say a kid can't have too many trusted adults. And I think when we look through the lens of um, that clarity and that honesty and also bodily autonomy, respecting kids' boundaries, those are great foundational principles to be a trusted adult. Um, I'm pretty sure this is my last slide, or maybe the second to last slide. Nope, it was the last one, you guys. We did it. We ended a little early in case anybody has any thoughts, questions, or comments. But I could talk about this probably in my sleep at this point because I love this topic. I think it is just important for everyone to know that their boundaries deserve to be respected. So holler at me in the chat. Jacob, you popped up. Any thoughts, questions, comments? If you want that reading list, I'm happy to share any information I have with you all. So thanks.
Thank you, Layla. I was just putting my camera on to thank you for that presentation. It's an incredibly
Oh,
important topic, and just wanted to
hey,
open
Jacob,
it.
I can't hear you very well.
Oh, you can't? Okay. Katie?
I don't know if your microphone is working as well.
How
Darn
about
it.
now?
Oh, perfect.
There we
Loud and
go.
clear.
Sorry, I just wanted to say thank you for that presentation. It's an incredibly important topic, and yeah, I just wanted to open it up to anyone else if they would like to ask Layla any questions.
Yeah, so I see in the chat, um, how about this? I will share my reading list. It's a document. It's too long for me to just rattle off on screen, but I would happily share that with um the Kansas Family Support Center staff that I've interacted with, and then they can disseminate that to all attendees or anyone that's interested. Um, Again, feel free to grab my email if you ever need it. In fact, I'll put it in the chat because no pun intended with reading lists, I am an open book. Um, again, this might not be a topic that um we have availability to, or we have I don't know what I'm trying to say, y'all. My matcha's running out. I think that there is not enough opportunity for us to talk about this topic. And so when it comes up or you have more questions, oh, we can send it out, post of an email. Perfect. Thank you, Jacob. because I don't think I could do two things at the same time in that moment. Um, I appreciate you all. Oh, let's see. Do. Are there some guidance of ways to help navigate what specifically, Carrie? Navigate the conversations, navigate. I want to make sure I'm understanding
Say,
your
I think
question.
there was a earlier question from Carrie that said, when trying to help with sharing relationships, development of friendship to dating relationships.
Ooh,
Is that what you're talking
oh,
about? Yeah.
yes. Thank you. I did not see that in the chat, so thank you. Okay, so do we have another hour? Just kidding. When trying to help with sharing relationships and development of friendship and dating relationships, I actually view them in the same way. And I think red, green, yellow flag behavior is a great way to identify not only what your individual personal boundaries might be, but what doesn't sit right with the person in any kind of relationship. Because I would say red flag behavior looks the same a lot of times in both romantic or sexual and friendship relationships. So we could say, hey, if somebody isn't listening or respecting your boundaries, that's not being a very good friend. That's not being a very good partner. I think we can also just talk about mutual respect and communication. If you have a friend that overrides your boundaries all the time and shares your secrets or your confidential information, again, we know that that is somebody not being respectful of our boundaries. And so it's a much bigger question, but I can't impress upon you enough, for the children and teens in your life, just keep having conversations, keep being that trusted adult, and that means some vulnerability on your part too. Okay, I'm just going to be completely open and honest. I have a 29-year-old son. When he was a teenager, I got nervous too. But what I did was I talked a lot about my own. I like to call myself uh like these are cautionary tales, right? And so I would say like, hey, I was having this situation and this is what happened and how it worked out. um Maybe I horrified him. I don't know. But the reality is I was vulnerable. I was honest. I was open about my own experiences so that he knows, oh my gosh, when I'm doing something completely ridiculous that might be like, I'm embarrassed to say this. Well, my mom's already embarrassed herself for me. So I know that I can trust her to handle hearing my uncomfortable or embarrassing situation. I just think, you know, being authentic is so powerful, and when we are authentic as adults, it models that for the children and teen. Carrie, you're off mute. Talk to me.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say thank you so much for addressing that. It's just it's hard to not only talk about the next steps in relationships, but even just navigating those initials like, hey, this is somebody trying to be a friend with you. So thank you so much.
Yes. Oh my gosh, of course. Again, this is a joy to talk to you all. And Jacob, I love what you said. Yeah, absolutely. It builds in that self-advocacy and empowerment aspect just by us embodying those principles, right? When we practice what we preach, then kids and teens in our lives know, hey, that person actually walks the walk. Because real talk, a lot of adults can be hypocritical. They can say, hey, here you have a choice, but then, oh my gosh, I'm just gonna out myself and say when my kid was 4, he said, Mom, you give me options, but then you make the choice. And I was like, oh, you're 4. I'm in trouble. Like, that was a huge realization point for me where I was like, oh no, I can give him options. He still gets to make the choice. So I think there's a lot of growth that happens when we are trusted adults. So I just want to say thanks, everybody, and have a wonderful weekend. I hope you do. Thanks again.